Skull Sessions podcast. Heard exclusively on RoadrunnerRecords.com/Skull Sessions. And now, here is your host, Bob Nalbandian.
All right. Welcome to the Shockwave Skull Sessions. This is episode number 19, and we're doing something a little bit different on this episode. We are going back to the 80s. That's right, guys. Strap on those leather chaps and chains because we are going back to the Sunset Boulevard circa 1985. That's right. On this very episode, we got my good buddy, Wendell Neeley from the Classic Metal Show. Many of you guys, I know many of these Shockwave Skull Sessions listeners are very familiar with the Classic Metal Show, as Shockwave Skull Sessions is featured on the Classic Metal Show site. For those that don't know, you can check it out at theclassicmetalshow.com. And also you can hear them live every Saturday night. Along with Neeley, who joins us on this episode, we've got Nadir DePriest, who, as many of you know, was the frontman from the band London since 1984 and has since gone on to record under the moniker DePriest. And Nadir, being a long-time LA musician, he shares some great stories from the early days of London, pre-Nadir London, on through the current scene. So some great stories. I always love going back into the old LA scene, even pre-80s. We touch into a lot of the late 70s scene with the Starwood and clubs like that. And Nadir gets into that as well, which is always really cool because I always felt that was an era of music that has been so neglected. There were so many bands. I mean, I was just a young kid at the time, so I never actually went to the Starwood, but I did see great shows at the Whiskey. In fact, I saw Saxon at the Whiskey when they first came over to the States on the Denim and Leather tour. Of course, Metallica opened those two shows, and actually Rat opened one night, Metallica opened the second night. And, of course, that was Metallica's second show, I believe, second or third show. And had the privilege to see a lot of great local bands on the Strip. Many of the bands that have since gone into multi-platinum status, including Motley Crue, Guns N' Roses, as well as an array of all the LA glam bands. So definitely a cool time, and we're going to kind of revisit that era. So we're going to get right into it. This is quite a long podcast. It runs just over an hour. But before I do get into this episode, the episode, by the way, was recorded a couple months back. So once again, I'm still getting kind of caught up on these podcasts, but we got some great stuff ahead of us. The following episode should be a great podcast on Ye Olde Metal, which is a great series of books that Martin Popoff has recently released. It's actually separated in series from like the early 70s through 73 to 74, 75 through 77, and I believe his newest is 1978. And myself, Martin Popoff, John Stranansky, and newcomer David Tedds discuss a lot of these great underground hard rock and metal bands from that era. So that's a great podcast. We also have a incredible new wave of British heavy metal podcast that's going to feature Brian Slagle, Ron Quintana, and John Cornairns. An awesome discussion. We got lots of great stuff coming your way here. So you can always check out the Shockwave Skull Sessions episodes and keep yourself updated by logging onto the site at roadrunnerrecords.com/skull sessions. Of course, the podcast is also available on iTunes and many other podcast directories. And if it's not on your directory, send me an email. You can email me at shockwaveskullsessions@gmail.com. And I will answer every email I receive. It might take me a few days, but I will get to you. So please send me those comments and suggestions. Okay, with that said, man, let's go ahead and get right into this. Once again, this is the Los Angeles 1980s Sunset Strip podcast featuring Neeley of the Classic Metal Show and Nadir DePriest.
We got the famous Wendell Neeley from the Classic Metal Show. What's up, Neeley?
Hey, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here on the Skull Sessions.
I got to say, and I've said it before, and I will say it again, not just because you're here, but Classic Metal Show, my all-time favorite podcast. If you haven't checked out the Classic Metal Show, go to theclassicmetalshow.com and definitely check out all the episodes. Some great, hilarious stuff there, man. Love your show.
Thanks, Bob. As you know, the Classic Metal Show is a live show on Saturdays, and Chris and I just cut up the 6-hour live show and offer it as individual podcast downloads throughout the week for people who may have missed the show and just want to catch the highlights of our goofiness and our buffoonery, if you will. So, yeah, you can catch the 6-hour live show on Saturdays from 9 p.m. Eastern Time till 3 a.m. in the morning. Or if you're a avid podcast downloader, you can go over to theclassicmetalshow.com, and there's numerous links over there as to how to get the best of the Classic Metal Show.
All right, and our third-party guest is Nadir Depriest, who many people know, the lead vocalist of London. And now, Nadir, correct me if I'm wrong, the band is now called Depriest.
Yes, well, first I want to thank you for having me on your show. It's a great pleasure for me also, and of course it's even a great time having both of you guys, both you and Neeley, Neeley being one of our biggest supporters for London/Depriest. And yes, the band's called Depriest, but the change actually started in 1988-89 when Noise Records, BMG at the time, had asked that the band be changed from London to Depriest. It was a change that I thought, I guess it was due because of the fact that there was only myself left and everyone else had left from the original lineup. So, yes, it is Depriest nowadays. And, it's great being back again.
For people who don't know, let's kind of go back to London's history. We just talked about you joined the band in 85, but the band was together since 78, right?
Around 78, I believe, 79. Don't quote me on which one of those it is, but it's one of those two.
Didn't Lizzie form it? Was it originally with Blackie or Nikki Sixx that he formed the band with?
They were both. I believe there was Blackie and Nikki and Dane Rage on drums and Lizzie on guitar, and they were all in the band, I believe. So I don't remember seeing Blackie logs, but I think there was a point where the lineup was all of them together. There was Blackie, Nikki, Dane, and Lizzie. I believe Blackie left, and he formed Sister, and then after that, Nikki stayed for a little while, and then he bolted. He formed Motley Crue. That was basically it. And the rest, it's kind of like history.
Now, when you joined, you actually played when Slash was in, or was Izzy already in the band when you had joined London?
No, that whole lineup, actually, with Slash and all that, was more to where I came in, but he lasted, I believe, not even a week on that. He lasted no more than a week in that lineup. And then immediately after he was gone, I came in, and then we linked up with Izzy Stradlin and Steven Adler. And then we were working on demos with Bob Welch. I don't know, for any young kids out there, Bob Welch, he was in one of the original...
From Fleetwood Mac, that Bob Welch?
Yeah, exactly. So he was producing our demos during the lineup of Izzy, myself, Lizzie Gray, and Bobby Marks, who used to be the drummer for Steeler, or I guess Keel. And Bobby Marks was dating Lizzie's sister. It was like a whole circle of people hanging out at the time. So all this happened very quickly. I mean, Steven Adler was in, Izzy was in. I was only the lead singer of London. I was in another band. They dragged me out of another band that I was in called Vertigo from West Covina. Basically, that's when it really started forming and creating more interest, especially with the local scene and the labels. Started kind of going, wait a minute, who are these cats? But there was more to this. This is just one piece of the whole puzzle,
So actually, when the whole, the LA scene first started exploding, I mean, you had, the first boom, which was, Van Halen, but they were really the only band. You had other bands like Legs Diamond and bands like that were signed, but Van Halen was really the only one in the late 70s that blossomed. And
there was another band. There was another band, actually, a good friend of mine was a guitar player for it, and they were called Virgin. And Virgin was on Casablanca Records, which I guess was the Gene Simmons flagship. And they were pretty much around the same time, I believe, it was Legs Diamond.
Really?
Or Michael Diamond and all those guys. But, there was not a lot. Van Halen is pretty much 78, because they were doing the Starwood around 78. And I used to live in Pasadena, so we used to go to their house and watch them, shoot cans of Coors beer with BB guns in their backyard. We were just kids, So it was pretty funny, because we were actually just in awe about these guys. You go, see Eddie Van Halen on at a backyard, and he's doing solos, and he turns his back on you, and you're listening to these sounds, and you didn't know what he was doing. He was just an amazing guy. So There was not many. And Angel, of course, I don't know if
Right.
everyone
Well,
remembers
Angel was obviously, they were from the East Coast, but they toured L.A. quite a bit.
Well, they stayed in L.A. They ended up hanging in L.A., because they were on Casablanca themselves.
Right. And of course, Y&T, who were from the Bay Area, they always came out to L.A. I remember they were always playing.
Well, that was the stomping ground, man. You got to remember the whiskey back then and the Roxy. I mean, the Roxy. If you could get in the Roxy, you were badass. I mean, you were like unreal if you were able to get your ass in that venue at the time. And the whiskey, of course, was the place to play. I mean, it's not like that anymore, but, it's just like the Central and, which is, I guess, now called the Viper Room. And, of course, the Troubadour and the Star Wars.
Gazzarri's.
Gazzarri's, of course. But Gazzarri's, I think it was kind of like that low-level kind of place to play.
Yeah, I remember originally they had those 3 stages. Remember that, like an upstairs stage and
right. That's when Bill Gazzarri. I mean, he had the Doors, he had Van Halen, he had them all, but he had them at the the embryotic state of all that. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
well, I remember even throughout the '80s, Gazzarri's was like the least place you wanted to play on. That was where you would start out on the Strip, was Gazzarri's.
Yeah, the sound system was horrible. Everything echoed because it had such high ceilings. But that's where all the little loose chicks and young guys and everybody would hang out there for cheap.
Where were you at this time? You said you came out to L.A. in '85, Neeley. Did you ever make trips out to L.A. back in the early '80s? Or?
No, I was just pretty much a young kid then. I moved out to L.A. when I was 20. And that was 85, and I moved out to L.A. for work purposes. But the metal scene was coming on strong. I always had an interest in music and metal. Through college, I worked in a music store. I say this on my little bio on the website, where when I was working at a music store in college, I was seeing all the new CDs, or not CDs, that was albums and tapes at the time, come out. Sure. Which, Def Leppard, Pyromania hit real big, Metal Health hit real big, Queensryche released their first EP, Dokken came out with Breaking the Chains, Bon Jovi was coming on with Little Runaway. All these bands were just infiltrating the music store and taking over the new wave pop stuff, because at the time, when I first started in the music store, what was really popular was the new wave stuff, like the Eurythmics and Duran Duran and Culture Club and Kajagoogoo, and then all of a sudden this heavier music, this metal music was coming into play, and it caught my ear during the time I was at the music store. And when I moved out to L.A., it was like moving into the promised land.
It was a really busy time then. It was really, the Strip was just, like at its peak of everything, of music. It was just the timing between, 84 and 88, 89, that was like the time to be there at, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I felt that I had gotten to L.A., of course at the time I didn't know that that's what was going to happen. But I used to make trips into the Hollywood area and check out the shows and go to the Roxy and the Whiskey and of course Gazzarri's and check out a lot of the shows and see some of the Sunset Strip bands. But at that time, you didn't know that these guys were on the cusp of making it to be worldwide known or nationally known.
Right. Well, let's go back before that time, Nadir. We're talking about, the Starwood and the Whiskey and those days. Now, you were playing in other bands. You mentioned Assassin, right?
It was a band from Pasadena, California, and I had taken over on drums for a guy who was a pretty popular local drummer there, who happened to be one of the good friends of Alex Van Halen's, who worked at the music store called Dr. Music Center. I don't know if you ever heard of that place. It was in Pasadena, California, and actually, if you look in the back of the first Van Halen album, they got Dr. Music as their thanks in the back. And I played drums, but I played, basically like a few original songs and covers, and then I left the band and I joined a new wave band, believe it or not, and I did my first album at Rusk Recording Studios here in Hollywood at 17 on drums, and I met a guy named Neil Bogart, who happened to be like a huge executive of Boardwalk Records, who saw me, and he heard me singing, and he said, "You should sing." He said, you should give up the drums, you're not that great. And then after that, I just, kind of bounced around in a couple of bands and, with older guys. I always ended up with these older dudes that were really good, and they did not get my deal because I was such a, my register was higher up. I was singing different melodies, and they wanted me to do the Allman Brothers, and I wanted to do, Judas Priest or Black Sabbath mixed. I wanted to go within that style because that's where I was going, you know what I mean? Even though I grew up with Led Zeppelin and all kinds of different music because of my older brother. But again, I didn't seem to fit in a lot of this. It didn't work out for me till I basically joined Vertigo, and then I got to have a little bit more freedom, and then after that, I knew that it wasn't going to go very far, and that's when somebody came up to me, and which was Lizzie Gray, and asked me if I wanted to check out his band London. But he was told by, I believe, was not Jack Russell, the guitar player of Great White or Jack Russell or something. Mark Kendall, possibly, that they should check me out because Mark Kendall knew me from Orange County over at the Woodstock in Radio City, and he was in a band.
That was my hang, man. I used to live in OC. I used to go there all the time. Do you remember Don Costa played bass and Tony Richards played drums? This is pre-Great White. In fact, didn't Tony play in London for a little while? Who was in Wasp?
Yes, and he ended up in Wasp.
Yeah, didn't he play with London for a little bit, or no?
Basically, he was in London, and again, he was in the first two, I believe, Wasp albums, and we got together with him, and he fit right in. He was
he's a monster. I love Tony.
He was a really cool cat, but unfortunately, it didn't work out. Eventually, he was going through some stuff, and we had to move on and continue with our mission,
Yeah, I worked with him a little bit. I was working a bit with Pat McKeon from Max Havoc. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I remember Pat McKeon. Yes.
Tony was playing with him for a little while.
Yeah. Pat McKeon, last time I saw him was at a barbecue in Venice Beach with Rick Fox and myself in his backyard, grilling up some food and burgers and stuff, yeah.
Wow, that's funny. Talk about the old Starwood, because that was a club I never been to, and I know you performed at the Starwood with other clubs.
I actually got to see them there. So when I saw them, I was just in the audience. I would have never thought I was going to be in that band, and there was a line of people all across Crescent Heights and Santa Monica Boulevard, just full of people waiting to get into this show. So they were drawing like crazy at the time. And Nicky was in the band, and, it was a completely different scene, nothing but leather and lace and just, but that actually lasted for a while, the whole scene. I mean, it was really cool. I mean, I came in right the beginning of '84, you know what I mean?
Now, the Starwood kind of had that celebrity clientele, too, right? It wasn't just like the rocker crowd. I mean, it was like the happening place in Hollywood at the time, huh?
Well, it was like a punk area, and there was a rock and roll area. So it was a mixed crowd. So you got all kinds of people going into that. You got to remember, that was the heyday of the Troubadour, when the Troubadour was like a really cool place to go, and the Starwood was a really great place to go to, and the whiskey meant something at the time. And the Roxy was the elite place to go, and Desiree was kind of like the lower-end kind of club to go to.
Now, London actually, I always kind of felt when you joined the band, London took a lot heavier approach in '84, because before, from what I heard, they were a little bit poppier. They weren't quite as heavy. And then there was a kind of a hiatus, which, during the time when the LA scene exploded with Wasp and Rat and Steeler and, a Great White, all these bands were getting signed, London wasn't around, right? London actually didn't reform until '84, and that was like right after that.
That hiatus that you're talking about, it's the time where Lizzie Gray went through, I believe, a couple of singers. He had a guy named Michael White, and then
I remember from the White, the Zeppelin tribute band.
Yeah, and then he had a guy named John Ward who had a stint with Martha Hoople, and nothing happened. You know what I mean? Nothing happened in that. I mean, they didn't even have a recording. You know what I mean? Like, there was no demos, there's no vinyl, nothing. And Lizzie was, I'm sure one day you'll get to talk to Lizzie, but Lizzie was more into that British pop rock, the Sweet. I love the Sweet. It's happened to be one of my favorite bands, but, he was into that T-Rex and that whole thing. And again, like I said, when I came in, I was a harder singer. You know what I mean? I was more aggressive. My register was different. I was a bit higher. I would hold my notes longer. I wanted to do more what I was comfortable with. And to be honest with you, I didn't see the style that he was doing going anywhere. All I was seeing was the makeup of Metallica. I was seeing the makeup of Megadeth.
I was seeing Wasp, I was seeing all this stuff, and I wasn't even following any of what they were doing. I was just doing what I was comfortable with, and I think I was in the band, a year, and before you know it, I had a deal with Shrapnel.
So you were signed with Shrapnel, that was before the Noise deal, correct?
Oh, yeah. No, we were signed twice before that, before Noise.
Okay.
I had another deal with a company, an independent investment company called Metalhead Records, and we did Don't Cry Wolf for that, which was engineered by Gene Marrows, who worked on, Fair Warning, and the keyboard player was one of the top keyboard players in town, and Kim Fowley produced that album.
Yeah, he's another guy I worked with. He's a fucking trip.
Yeah, so it was a transition, but you got to remember London couldn't get laid, man, with a handful of 50s at the time as far as record companies. They didn't want to touch them. Motley Crue was already they were taking off like fire, man. They as soon as they got that leather on and they got that look on and they got the blonde singer and they got all that happening and they got a good looking band, it just didn't take long for them to take off. There was nothing like that. And the only ones that was available was Wasp. And if you look at it, there was really no difference between both of those bands. And if you look at older London pictures, that's what they were dressing like back then with the London days.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it wasn't like Motley Crue came out with a new Adam. It was more like Nicky took an idea from when he was in London and expanded it more and, just kind of took off with that. I mean, at least that's my take on it. I mean, there may be people disagreeing on it, but I looked at it and it's like, it's taking all that Alice Cooper thing and adding it into London and then taking it from London and adding it to Wasp and Motley Crue and the rest is Europeans doing it.
Right. Kind of how'd you sign with Shrapnel? Because he was Mike Varney was just all into the guitar thing at the time, and he really didn't deal with many of the Hollywood bands.
I think Mike Varney was a visionary. I think he wanted to be the first to grab something that he could possibly capitalize with, even if he didn't have you in a major situation, just to have you on a little shelf. You know what I mean? I think we got a whopping $8,000 to make our record at the time, and we didn't really have any money. We're sitting at a studio with a minimal amount of equipment and very little money, and who would have known that little crappy studio we were at, the guy who owned it was the guy who wrote Papa Don't Preach, that Madonna ended up making a multi-million-dollar platinum record out of that. And this little crappy bathroom-sized studio. In '85 was a really busy time for us, because we were making our firstborn nonstop rock, and we were like inseparable, and we were just us and against the world and trying to make it happen, and watching everyone that used to be in London just completely taken off in this great success. You know what I mean?
Right. I remember you guys toured relentlessly, too.
We played a lot, man. We played so much. I mean, we had, we played with GNR prior to being GNR. We played with Great Y. We played with Pat Travers. We played with Montrose. We played with Foghat. We played with all kinds. We played with Warren somewhere in Downey somewhere prior to Warren even being anything special. So we did a lot. I mean, we made ourselves accessible. We didn't have an attitude. We were pretty much, we'll play anywhere for a fucking bar tab. That was our mentality.
So Neeley, man. So in comes Neeley in Los Angeles. And tell me about your experience after, working at the record store and stuff. What was I know you became real close with Dawkins, right, Neeley?
Yeah.
You got pretty involved in the whole LA scene, correct?
Sure. But I didn't know the guys in Dawkins back in the day. I became friends with Don back in about '94. And he and I just struck up a friendship then. But, back in the 80s, in the mid to late 80s, I was just a spectator. I wasn't a participant in any way. I was just one of those guys that you see hanging out on the sidewalk trying to get into one of the clubs that you would have seen on the Decline of Western Civilization movie. I would make frequent trips into Hollywood to check out to check out what's going on with whatever bands were out there. I hadn't met Nadir until just about 5-6 years ago now. But just like any of the other metal kids out there, per se, I was just one of the guys on the street going from club to club, just checking out to see what was going on.
I was really into, I was real close with Armored Saint when they were starting out, and I was always more into the European sounding stuff. I never really got into the whole LA glam thing when that broke, and when Metallica, I saw their very first shows and the formation of Megadeth, and that was kind of my thing. And even, bands like Warrior, and more of the heavier of Malice that were, a little bit more of a European edge. But around the time, when you came, 85 and stuff, that was when that big glam scene started, and that was something I really got turned off by was, when bands like Poison, and these were mostly bands that weren't even from LA. Everyone started coming out to LA. You had Poison, Warren, Faster Pussycat,
Cinderella,
Pretty Boy Floyd.
It's really funny to me how bands like Pretty Boy Floyd have gotten so much attention because of their look of the bands, and in reality there was really no substance in their music. I hope that it doesn't really turn anyone off that I'm making that comment, but
I agree 100%.
I remember playing with Poison back at in San Diego, playing at the Adams Avenue Theater, and getting into some rough physical altercations with security over the fact that we had this gigantic riser, 8 feet high by 8 feet wide, with a naked girl dancing inside of the speaker, a screen, and we pretty much, we had our sound set. We always made sure our sound was always taken care of. We were so just into that it was really important that you were bigger than life. And a lot of those bands ended up being really successful. And I'm really happy that happened to a point to where we didn't want to get categorized for the type of music that they were doing, because we were not doing glam. We were just wearing big hair, tight pants, looking really good, but we were a lot harder than that. But the glam thing, I think that we got to thank all those great fucking A&R people that were at the labels at the time, because they were all jumping on each other's wagons, you know what I mean?
Oh, sure. It was just like when the grunge movement hit in Seattle. They were all just signing any copycat band that could do that. But, the thing about, we talk about the earlier days, and you look at even the bands that were kind of considered glam or somewhat commercial back then, there was a lot more musical talent. I mean, you talk about Dokken. They were, kind of a glamish poppy band, but I mean, George Lynch was, amazing. Rat had Warren DeMartini. I mean, Carlos Cavazo. All these cats, were incredible players. And, when it came to these other bands that started coming over, like you mentioned the Pretty Boy Floyd, it was all about image, and there was no substance. There was no music. That was, of course, when MTV hit, and the whole, glam scene just was totally capitalized on just the image, and it had very little to do with music.
It was a Barbie image to me. I mean, the whole thing was like a Mattel doll coming out. They came out with the glam doll, and that's basically what it was at. There was so many bands with the same look, and it was just, it was amazing how all of a sudden you pick up flyers. I mean, this is back when you used to pass out flyers. How many people, you look at the photos and wait a minute, that band looks like this band and that band, down to the clothing and the hairdos. And in reality, I was the guy that was, taking a lot of that beating because I was dressing up so, glammy, but we weren't playing glam. So, I don't know. It was, I guess, cool for the chicks.
Well, speaking of Dokken there, guys, that just because I know Don pretty well, he's even admitted that his management at the time, who also was managing Metallica, advised them, Q Prime management, advised them just to do the stripped down look, the jeans and the leather, and, don't go with the glam image. And Don said that, they, rejected that idea and wanted to go with more of the glammy look. Just because of that's what was catching everybody's attention.
True.
It definitely was. Yeah, it was.
Well, you look later, he had signed Q-Prime, he had signed, I believe, Tesla at the time, and Tesla kind of went for that image. They probably weren't as successful as the LA bands, but I think they got a lot more respect in the fact that they, weren't your pretty boy band. They were more just down to earth, great musicians and good tunes. And they might not have been the MTV favorite, although they did pretty well, with MTV and whatnot. But it's interesting.
Well, that's why even today they're known as a blue collar band, because they appealed to just the average Joe Six-Pack blue collar guy out there, and it wasn't appearance over substance.
But a lot of it, like you say, it was really forced with the record companies, and particularly the major labels. I mean, I remember when Armored Saint first, signed with Chrysalis, and not only the image but music. Everything was about getting the radio hit. If you listen to March of the Saint, that album was so polished. And I remember hearing the rough mixes of those tunes, and I was seeing the band live back then, and they were like Metallica, man. I mean, they had riffs. I mean, they were the heavy band in L.A. I mean, because Metallica was really nothing back then. Armored Saint was the band that brought in the real heaviness to L.A. when they first started. And, you know, Chrysalis wanted to make them into like a radio-oriented band. And that was the case, I think, with all the bands back then. I mean, you even look at how, you know, we mentioned even Rat was a lot heavier back in the day. Ron Keel with Steeler. You know, it was a little bit more of a European sound. And same with, you know, Dante Fox was quite heavy. Although Great White always stuck to more their blues-based stuff. But did you have a lot of that from record labels, Nadir, when you were going through that period, like labels wanting to change your sound or your image or trying to make it more polished or more radio-friendly?
Basically, I don't think that we were being asked to change anything at all. I think what they were trying to do is just kind of like, they would offer us, you know, MCA was one of them, offering us deals, and somehow or another, you know, they would come up with some kind of other excuse that they would have to change some things and all of that. But, you know, I never really directly got to hear anything, you know what I mean? Unless the people that were handling us at the time, you know, knew anything that I don't know about. But no, I never was asked to do anything different. Maybe tone it down a little bit, because I was way too over the top with my look, but that was what was bringing girls in, and I think that's what they found appealing even more, you know.
I remember Nadir making the comment in the Decline of Western Civilization movie that London was like the cheap hooker on the street. Nobody wanted to know about him as far as record labels were concerned.
Right. Yeah, that's a great comment. I remember that.
It was the truth, you know. But then again, you know, there was labels that wanted you, and we wanted a big deal though, because that was the days of the $500,000, $1 million deals. You know what I mean? So
sure. You
know, it was one of those things where, you know, we wanted that. We didn't just want any deal, but eventually we ended up, you know, with shrapnel.
Well, I was wondering about that because obviously, you know, London were one of the original L.A. rock metal bands, and you would think you would have had a lot of label offers. And, you know, I know at the time, I remember when Wasp just signed with Capitol, it was supposedly Capitol's biggest, you know, recording deal.
Yeah, that was the biggest deal they've signed, I believe. It was like $1 million, I think.
Yeah, which was like huge back then, and everyone was kind of holding out. Was that kind of the case? Was Lizzie Gray holding out for the biggest deal, or what was the situation then?
I believe that that's what it was. I think that we were looking for the big deal, and then we became fucking just stupid about it, and nothing ever kind of came out of that idea, and we ended up with crap.
Right.
Not to insult shrapnel, but at the time, I mean, there was nothing else. It was one of those things where this manager guy said, hey, look, you got nothing here and you got something here. You either end up with nothing or you're going to take something you're never going to get published. So that's how we ended up, you know.
Well, you look at Steeler, too. Their first album was on Shrapnel. That, of course, was when Yngwie was in the band. You know, that was right. Kind of the guitar thing that you know, interested Varney. But that album really didn't do a whole lot either. I mean, I think it sold more after Yngwie became successful just because, you know, Yngwie was on it. But at the time it came out, it didn't make quite the impact that people expected. Because Steeler was one of the bigger bands on the circuit, I remember back then.
Yeah, he was doing great. Yeah, them and Black and Blue were doing great, too. You know? Yeah,
that was the other band. So let's talk about the Decline movie and your experience with that. That was, of course, like kind of at the tail end. That came out in like
87.
Late, toward the end of the 80s, right?
It was 87. The movie was filmed in 1980.
Oh, 87, okay. But it was still kind of at the tail end of that whole thing, and, you know, she really exploited the whole, you know, glam scene, and she took the worst of the worst, you know, as far as, you know, just unknown idiots off the strip, you know, interviewing them. Of course, she had, you know, real bands, and, you know, bands like Megadeth and, you know, of course, London and other bands, Lizzie Borden and whatnot, but people that saw it for the first time thought, you know, that these idiots that are being filmed were like, you know, actual bands that were huge at the time, and, you know, most of the people interviewed were just fucking nobodies out there. What was your whole experience with working with Penelope on that?
Well, my take was that we wanted to get our mugs on anything, and I had a meeting with Penelope, myself, and Lizzie at, I believe it was the IRS Records building, which was on Sunset Boulevard. And we met and we talked with her, and she told me, you know, there's a lot of bands that are in this film, or there's a few bands that are in this film, I believe she said, that don't really want you guys in the movie, you know?
Oh, really? What bands were they?
Kind of odd. And I'm going, really? And the first thing back then, since I was a bit out of my mind, I said, give me some names. I'm like, just give me one. It didn't take, much to narrow it down. I don't want to say the name, but because I can't really say that was them. But I
Blackie Lawless.
No, I don't think it was Blackie. Blackie and I, get along, and he, and Lizzie talk. I mean, they're fine and all that at the time. I think there was other bands, some tonic band that was there, and some other weapon band that's called. I don't want to say the names. I don't want to tell you, because I can't prove that was them. But I'm pretty much sure that there was these two bands that might have said something. But what she said to me was, just because of that, she said, I want you in the movie even more. She says, because that is definitely what I'm looking for. Because they were talking about how we are out of control, that we might not be able to behave on set, or that we just, one of those bands that you never know what we were going to do. And that's exactly, they didn't know, but that's exactly what she wanted. So she says, that's why you're here, because we want you in the movie. And, we were taped, live at Gazzardi's with the Westwood One mobile unit. You know what I mean? We were like, hey, this is great. We went from nothing to now we're in this movie, and we're being filmed, and we're being recorded, and this amazing, the Westwood One mobile unit. How much more can you ask for? That was like having a Rolls Royce outside, you know what I mean?
What was your take on it, Neeley, when you first saw that movie? Seeing Nadir for the first time on the screen.
Well, the funny thing about it is when I started doing the Classic Metal Show back in '96, I had some sidekicks who were my sidekicks when the show was very early on, and all three of us were fans of the Decline movie. It was a big eBay item back then, and getting a hold of a copy was, kind of priceless. In fact, I'm sitting here with my copy in the hard box VHS tape.
Was it pretty rare, hard to get?
Yeah, it was hard to get. It was hard to find.
You can't get them. If
you
can find them, grab it.
Yeah, if you can find one, you're lucky. But anyway, I just to preserve the copy that I have, I went ahead and burned it to a DVD. So I don't have to hurt the original copy. But the Decline movie was kind of the Bible of the Classic Metal Show early on. We enjoyed the goofiness of it, the funny quips. And Nadir, the reason Nadir and I kind of hit it off is because we're kind of the same ilk, And one of the funny things about the Decline movie was that back in the mid to late 90s, people were wearing those little cloth bracelets that says "What would Jesus do?" on it. And the catchphrase on the Classic Metal Show, if we were discussing a subject in the metal genre, is our catchphrase is "What would Nadir do?" And that was kind of a running joke on the Classic Metal Show. So it was kind of fate that Nadir and I kind of met and became as good a friend as we are. But as far as the movie goes, I agree with you, Bob. She did take the worst of a lot of the the nonsense and made it look cheesy and almost made it look stupid in a way. But at the same time, it has a cool nostalgia about it now today, 20 years later. So
sure,
it's a fun movie. I watch it frequently and enjoy the scenes, and just know that since I've been doing the Classic Metal Show and I hung out in that scene, I got to know pretty much most of everybody who's been in that movie.
Well, I think a lot of it, she, obviously came from the punk background. She did the first Decline was a punk movie, and it seems like her intention was to, just totally make the LA metal scene look like a joke, which a lot of it was a joke, but, she even took it to the extreme. And, of course, a lot of the stuff was staged. I've talked to so many people that were involved with the movie or that were involved in the making of the movie, and, she was looking for that. A lot of the stuff was staged, a lot of the interviews and, the Chris Holmes part and a lot of the other stuff. I think even Jeff admitted on your show, which I had heard many times, Jeff Duncan said, that wasn't really vodka that he was swigging and stuff like that. And after that hit, that was when the whole scene kind of died and grunge took over, and people looked at it like, fuck, this scene is a joke. What am I doing listening to this metal scene? These guys are a bunch of fucking idiots. And do you think that had a big effect on why the LA scene died the year later?
No, I don't think that's why it died. It died because the industry wanted it to die, and they wanted to come up with some great fucking title like grunge, just like they have new titles of different types of music right now. It's all a trend change. You know, that's all it was. Because if you really look at it, trying to get a hold of any of this music and physical in your hands, it's really hard to get now. You know what I mean? And now those joke type of bands that people look at are become $30-$40 cassettes that are worthless, really, become collectibles. I mean, I think that the industry basically just wanted to move on, just like they went from new wave to the glam and metal, because now the industry is just completely, as far as the labels, just sinking, you know, really fast, you know, and it's changed the whole, you know, the whole way the markets are moving now, you know, with the internet and downloads and all that. So, I mean, I don't think that I have an answer for that, but I thought that just the labels were the ones that made the change, and they wanted to do something different. They were tired of it, and they just came up with something new. Because I believe that grunge was just completely ruined the hell out of the business. I didn't care for it. I just didn't see it, you know.
Well, you know, it's funny because the grunge bands played, you know, when they first started. I mean, I used to see Alice in Chains and Soundgarden at the clubs, and I loved them, and I still love a lot of those bands.
Yeah, Alice in Chains was great. As a matter of fact, I got to hang out with Sean Kinney, the drummer, in Phoenix. It was a great bands, but I just thought that all of a sudden all these massive amounts of grunge bands were created, down from some of the 80s bands going grunge, you know, with players that were like in the 80s bands, all of a sudden they're like in grunge bands, and everyone's just kind of getting on the bandwagon and trying to fit in, you know.
That's funny you say that, because I remember seeing Soundgarden at one of the early Foundations forums, and they played at that place on Highland where they had the Cat House. You know, there was like 20 people there, and I remember seeing some of the L.A. musicians there. And I was digging it. This is when the Loud Love album was just coming out, and I'm going, fuck, this band is great. I had heard about them and heard some of their early stuff, and then I saw them live, and I remember seeing, you know, I won't mention who, but all these L.A. kind of glam musicians going, this is fucking shit, this sucks, what is this bullshit? And then, like, about 5 months later, they're dressed in flannel on those Doc Martens and doing the grunge thing, you know, and I'm going up to them, dude, I thought the music was shit. What's your take, Neeley?
Well, actually, the grunge scene is what, you know, spurred me on to start the Classic Metal Show. You know, I wasn't a fan of any of that. Probably my favorite band out of that whole thing was Alice in Chains. If you buy their box set, the Musical Bank, or Music Bank, I think it's called, they've got some early recordings of Alice in Chains, and they were just a straight-up hard rock band. You know, they
were a cover band, and they did covers, from what I understand, of a lot of the old metal bands.
Sure, and they sounded great before, you know, the Lane Staley and Jerry Cantrell started harmonizing and doing kind of the whining thing, you know. And but no, I wasn't a fan of the grunge scene at all. I was very disappointed with it, and that's the reason why I started the Classic Metal Show in '96, is to kind of, in my own way, counteract the grunge scene, or the what popular FM radio was playing, because they wouldn't play any of the bands from the 80s at all. You know, you would never hear Queensryche, or you'd never hear Tesla, or any of those bands on commercial radio. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to do something personally to fight back with this. And I went to broadcasting school, and, you know, started on a small FM station in Akron, Ohio. And with the you know, technology ever changing with the internet and things, and having a worldwide audience, that only allowed me to expand the show to where it is today, and become sort of a staple in the underground heavy metal music scene. There's not, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back here, but there's not a lot of people who are active in the music scene that doesn't know about the Classic Metal Show. And you know, 13 years and 13 years and counting, you know, we're still going strong. We're going stronger than ever.
And like I said, by far my favorite show. I mean, the way you and Chris interact, and some of the shit you guys talk about, just absolutely hilarious. But going back to the Seattle scene, I mean, a lot of people don't realize, because everyone thinks, especially the younger people, think that, you know, Seattle was born with grunge music. But, you know, you mentioned Queensryche from Seattle, Metal Church, TKO. there were a lot of just straight up, metal bands or thrash metal bands out of Seattle before that. And, I remember doing an interview with David Wayne from Metal Church, and he used to say, members of Nirvana were at their shows. And, the early Alice in Chains, they were out on tour with Pantera and the Clash of the Titans, all these thrash bands and stuff. And, the funny thing is the whole grunge thing, I thought it was a very intimate thing when you see them in the clubs, Alice in Chains and Soundgarden. They were great in that intimate environment, but they weren't arena bands, and that's what really bugged me about it. I liked a lot of the music. I thought they had a lot of energy live, but you see a band like Soundgarden, even Alice in Chains, who I love, you can only take so much of, Lane Staley staying in one place, banging his head. Or I remember seeing the band Candlebox live, and I remember liking a few of their songs. I saw them live. They just stood there, and it's like they made it a point not to entertain the audience, just like stand there just lifeless. And it's like, this is fucking stupid, and you kind of miss that whole arena vibe, you go, see the Scorpions, see even someone like Bon Jovi, who I'm not a Bon Jovi fan at all, but I could say at least their live show was entertaining, and that was the thing that really bummed me, not just about grunge, but about the whole 90s scene. It just got into that whole acoustic thing and that whole Lilith Fair thing. Neeley, on the Classic Metal Show, I know you and Chris have discussed this about how nowadays there's no arena rock bands. And do you think it is because of the fact that people aren't as hungry as they are anymore? I mean, back then, as you said, Nadir, you had mentioned earlier, a lot of these bands were living on the streets or barely making it, and this was their only drive to make it. But that kept the scene alive, and that made the band have to perform at their peak.
Well, on the Classic Metal Show, we discussed that the day of the arena act is dying out. Now, we didn't say that metal is dying out, but the arena-size metal acts are dying out because after, say, the Judas Priest or the Iron Maidens or the Van Halens or the Kiss or any AC/DCs are gone, I don't think there's going to be another arena act to replace those. And if you think back, all of those arena acts are 30 plus years old, heading up to 40 years old, and there's no one out there that can put on a big show. And I believe that even without quite the exposure that MTV provided, commercial radio was a big impact on bands such as Led Zeppelin, who could sell out an arena without an MTV video because that wasn't even around yet. But I believe it's the record label development of the artists that would cause that, and there are no record labels. There is no money put in behind a talented band like a Zeppelin or an Iron Maiden or a Black Sabbath or any of these other arena acts that are still out there today. But I think once those bands are gone, after life catches up with them and they're 6 feet under, there won't be another arena act like we're seeing today, and that's why I personally go to every big show that comes in the area, because I always think maybe this is the last time I'm going to see these guys.
But you got to remember the MTVs and radio at the time, there was a lot of payola going on. At least I saw a lot of things going on. You were able to do a lot of things if you were, you had the backing, to support your songs or your single, and also to be able to get them to do a lot of things. So again, now I can't really answer that question of what do I think that there will be, big arena rock. I sure hope so. I sure hope that there will be a rotation of that beautiful time with the live shows and the big stages and the hungry crowds and all of that, because if that's dead, then you really don't have anything but synthetic music. I meet a lot of people who say, yeah, I'm a singer, I'm a producer, I'm all that, and yeah, I have my own studio and all that. I drag and drop vocals and things like that, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is crazy. Anyone now can be anything, just by having software and all that. So I don't know if that's going to, make it to where everything's just synthetic and, and it's just going to be minimal and it's just going to be a little click scene in every state, and then everything's going to shrink down to just like certain venues and that's it, not like big time rock and roll as we would call it.
What are your thoughts, Neeley?
Well, I don't know. I think again, it all develops. It comes back to artist development, and I don't think there's anybody out there developing an artist. And because of the invent of the internet and MySpace and all these individual little local bands that you would have never heard of, they have the ability, just like Nadir said, to produce their own music through Pro Tools and digital media. that there's no interest from a label to develop an artist because, number one, there's such a diversity of music out there. There's no one music out there right now that's overwhelmingly popular except your mainstay pop music that basically just goes away tomorrow. You never remember those songs like the Britney Spears or the Justin Timberlakes or the Christina Aguileras and stuff of the world, you know? And as far as like talented musicians and bands go, they're far and few in between, in my opinion. At least what I've seen. The only hotbed of hard rock metal bands that are very proficient and sound great are most of the bands that we feature a lot on the Classic Metal Show, and a lot of them come out of Sweden. And it is really amazing the musicianship that comes out of Sweden and how many bands that little country has. It's just phenomenal. But if it, asking my opinion, will there be any big arena acts in the near future? I don't really think so.
Yeah, I totally agree with you about Sweden. And, I've worked with a lot of bands in Sweden, and they all say the same thing, is there's nothing to do in Sweden. It's dark half the year, it's colder than fuck, so you're just sitting home rehearsing all day and sipping on whiskey.
Plus, they have a state sponsorship schooling over there that the state sponsors their opportunities to go learn a musical instrument. So,
well, of course, Nadir probably remembers back in the 80s and early 90s. You go to the Rainbow, half the people there were Swedish. They all came over on a school-funded aid for GIT, the MI.
GIT, and, that is correct. And it was really funny because a lot of the bands that were playing on the scene would make fun of all those guys from GIT because they thought that they were just not happy. It's really weird, just looking back, you're bringing up a lot of stuff that, I haven't really thought about. But, yeah, I mean, it was a completely different feel when you go out and you see all these guys from Europe, and they were so happy to be there, happy to be in L.A., be part of the Hollywood scene. They were looking for gigs. They were willing to do anything it would take just to get into some sort of a gig, and, proof is in the pudding,
You had made an interesting point when you were talking about the decline of the Western civilization movie. You said there were a lot of artists that was telling the directors, Penelope Spheres, that they didn't want to include London in the movie. And that was very common back then. There was a very competitive vibe between the L.A. bands back in the 80s and even back to the late 70s. And even though you guys could go out to the Rainbow and everything, everyone would be friends and whatnot, when it came to getting a deal, it was like unbelievable amount of competition. There were very few venues to play. There were very few labels, that were really scouting this type of music until the big, hair metal thing came in and when MTV jumped on it. So to get any kind of recognition, it had to be through the live shows. And it was very competitive to get a good night at, say, the Troubadour, whereas today, playing the Whiskey or the Roxy or the Troubadour means nothing. If you're a band, you've got money, you could play a weekend at the Whiskey or the Roxy.
Sure. Well, when I started going and doing shows, let's say like you mentioned at the Troubadour, I was in a band that I walked into that was called Vertigo. It was just something that, I got into with some great cats that, I had never met before. And we were doing shows already at the Troubadour while Doug Westlands was still around, and when you would see like David Soul, from Starsky and Hutch and all these television people hanging out at the Troubadour when there was actually a really cool scene in Hollywood and not so much like it is now with the paparazzi and all that. But again, going back to the original thing you mentioned, there was places to play. There was Madam Wong's East, West, there was the Music Machine, there was Orange County, Radio City, the Woodstock, there was Golden Bear. I think that the thing back then was that there was a lot of bands coming in from out of state calling themselves LA bands. And as you said, that there was a lot of competition between bands. I don't think that for me that I took it as competition. I think that these bands, because they were not from LA, a lot of them were, really hungry and really wanted to make a dent on the local show. And some of them, were very aggressive, to be honest with you. But for me, we just kept going and playing live, and people love to come to shows.
You see a lot of these newer breed bands, even from the late 90s on, that they come from a very, affluent background, that their attitude is like they're, from the ghetto, they're real, and how the 80s scene was so phony. But if you look at it in reality, you were broke, you were starving, you were hungry. You didn't have everything handed to you. You didn't have your instruments bought to you by your mommy and a bus to tour in and blah, blah, blah. Your first tours, man, you guys did in your cars or your van or whatever you had. And, you know, they talk about the 80s scene as being the corporate rock, but you see all these new bands and you see corporate sponsors all over their fucking stage. You know, they're the epitome of corporate rock. What is your view about that when people talk about corporate rock?
Well, I don't consider that London was corporate rock. If anything, it was more like a really raw, raunchy type of rock band with really no support at all. I think that the only support London had, even prior for me coming in, was the audiences that were showing up to the shows. And we paid our dues. We did not have sponsorship. We built our own stages, our own, our own audiences. And we really did not have any money to do a lot of these things, but we did, find a way of making things happen. If we had the tools that there are now, like the internet and sponsorships like this, wow, man, I think the whole story would be completely different, and I wouldn't be, probably having anything to talk about except for, how successful the career would have been. But,
sure.
It was a struggle, and there was a lot of bands that, had money behind them. Unfortunately, we did not have a lot of money behind us, but we did have a lot of interest from just people that wanted to come see us. So,
Neeley, what are your thoughts?
Well, I do believe that, some of the bands, some of them, I don't know a lot of the background of some of the newer metal bands out there today, but some of them, as you did mention, Bob, do come from a background of privilege, not to down anybody specifically, but I think some people, as you said, basically bought their way into the business, and I think that's what made the 80s so special for a lot of bands, is that they did struggle and they did starve, and you see the behind the music of, God forbid I use the example of Poison, but they talked about how they traveled from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and basically lived, in squalor, and didn't eat for days because they had zero money. And but they would go out there and play their hearts out, and hey, God bless them, it paid off for them. And look at Bret Michaels still raking in $1 million, plus a year, just doing handshaking on the Poison tour.
It's a joke. I mean, that's a band that I consider have absolutely no talent whatsoever. CeCe DeVille, Bret Michaels, complete talentless idiots, as far as I'm concerned. And I'll go say it flat out. No talent whatsoever, with the exception of they busted their ass and they perform. I will give them credit to that. They busted their ass every night they were out. You couldn't go anywhere in Hollywood without seeing the name Poison plastered somewhere. And you got to give the band credit for where credit's due, even though they were a shitty band, but they knew how to work it.
Very, very cool success story for Poison, and I give them credit, not only them, but bands like Stryper and a whole other bands that the whole gimmick thing worked out really well for them, and I hope that it continues. There's a lot of bands that were really talented that did not get to that point, but I think that you have like a road that's set for you, and you can't really like change that, and you can just go on and continue, doing music and not worry so much about how much money and great success, you could have or you didn't have and all that. Just to be happy with your musical and your artistic end of it. At least that's my take on it.
So, Nadir, I understand that London is getting together to do some reunion shows. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm actually in the middle of arrangements with Lizzie Gray, myself, and an old drummer. His name is Timmy Yasui, my guitar player from Dupree's, and we're going to be doing a gig at Palladino's. I believe it's on February the 13th, which is a Saturday, headlining there. And we bumped into each other at a club, and I was asked to go up on stage, and I haven't jammed with Lizzie since, 21 years ago, which was a really weird thing because it was kind of like we never lost the beat. We kind of like locked into the same thing we were doing before, like yesterday. It was really weird. For me, it was like, wow, this felt kind of a trip because, it's been so long, but it just seems like it was like a year ago. It's just like, it doesn't seem like it was 21 years ago. So that would be at Palladino's on the 14th.
What, now, Nadir, you were going through, you were in bands performing all throughout the 90s. How was that, and how did you survive? London was together throughout the entire 90s, correct?
Well, no. 91, it ended in a completely smashing disaster. Everyone kind of like was done. You know, everyone parted ways.
Oh, I didn't know that. You always continued.
Yeah, well, London pretty much was the name that died in 89. And in 90s when the album was out, 91, we were on 91 on tour, and then I moved away. I left. I moved to Arizona. I ended up hooking up with a guy, you know, that was a pretty popular guy. He was in a band that he was a lead guitar player for. And Jim Keeler, I don't know if you know who he is. He was a pretty happening guitar player. He still is. But I ended up hooking up with him, and we put up a band, put on a band called Rated X. And we was doing a lot of local shows in Arizona. I stayed there till, like, I would say till 93. Then I couldn't deal being in Arizona. I was flying back and forth to L.A. I started a funk band with backup singers and B3 players and guitar player, just like a huge funk thing. I did that for a year, left that, and I ended up hooking up with a company called Second Vision New Media, who were hired by Virgin Records to produce the Rolling Stones Voodoo Lounge CD-ROM, in which eventually I became project director for the Rolling Stones Voodoo Lounge and ended up going on tour with them as a multimedia producer. So I was employed by the Rolling Stones between 1994 and 1996. We were on the cover of Multimedia Producer magazine, got a lot of press, made a lot of money, wasted a lot of money, ended up getting out of that because of the internet. Nobody wanted CD-ROMs anymore, so it was all downloads. Lost that business and moved on and started to do a Latin hard rock record. Hooked up with Matt Sorum.
I heard about that.
Pre-Velvet Revolver. We produced an album for my solo, which included Chuck Wright, Matt Sorum, Teddy Andreadis, just an array of great players, and I did this hard rock thing. We went to Mexico City, performed. We had Bernard Fowler, who sings backup for the Rolling Stones, sang in Mexico City. Matt and everyone flew to Mexico. We recorded most of the tracks at an all-analog recording studio, which was what I wanted to do. And we finished everything at Sunset Sound in Hollywood. So I was pretty busy, you know, for a while.
What was the name of that project?
Well, the project was called Antonio Nadir, which is Nadir, and that was my solo album. If you go to MySpace on my website or depriest.com, you're going to see at my favorites a bronze face, and that's my face, and you can go to that. It's pretty different than what I was, than most people are used to listening to as far as for me. But it was something that I always wanted to do because there was just a whole array of stuff. I got a song from Ron Wood. You always wanted more than what you asked for, and that song, he signed off on me doing it in Spanish, and I was kind of reaching for a whole other thing, man. It was one of the great things about music is that I never really locked myself into one thing, and a lot of the greatest players, I believe, move themselves around, make themselves flexible with their taste, and I just like, trying different things, and I was really happy with it.
Right on. I'll have to definitely check that out. So, Neeley, you started the Classic Metal Show in '96. Is that when you moved back to Chicago? Were you in L.A. throughout '85 till '96, or?
No, I actually left the L.A. area in '91. California was experiencing a downturn in the economy at the time, and I was a victim of that because of having to make a living. I went out on the road and drove a truck cross country, and during the time of driving the truck, about the only thing you can do is just listen to the radio or listen to CDs, and FM radio was really starting to go downhill from there because of the poor programming and the crap music that they were playing. And as I drove the truck across country for a couple of years, that's what gave me the inspiration to go, you know what, there's a lot of bad DJs out here, and they're certainly not entertaining at all, and they're more like robots reading off of a cue card. So I'm going to get off the road, go to a broadcasting school, and start something other than what you're getting on commercial radio right now. And So I drove truck through the early part of the 90s and, went to school in 95 and started the Classic Metal Show in January of 96.
Now, did you work at radio stations before doing the Classic Metal Show, or you just started right in with the Classic Metal Show?
Well, during the 80s into the time that I left California, I was a club DJ at a rock and roll club. This was up in the high desert in Victorville, and it was a hard rock club where we, through my influence with the owner, I encouraged him to get into the hard rock thing, and we were spinning, hard rock videos and CDs and playing, GNR and The Cult and Tesla and Dokken and Whitesnake and, all that stuff. So I kind of got my broadcasting chops, if you will, being a club DJ, but I wanted to get behind a mic and actually do a show. And, my vision has brought me to where I am today after, like I said earlier, 13 years of doing this and meeting a lot of great people along the way and hooking up with my partner Chris back in late 90s when he was editor and owner of a music magazine, Music's Bottom Line, and we just hit it off, and here we are 10 years later doing the show together, and it's, to us, we think it's the most unique show out there.
Oh, absolutely. I agree 100%. So Chris Aiken, who your partner, he didn't come in till, when did you say? Just
I met him.
Ago then,
I met him in '98, and he asked me, since I was doing radio interviews with a lot of music artists through the Classic Metal Show, he asked me if I had any desire to put those interviews to print for his magazine, and also, being that I debuted new music, he also asked me if I wouldn't mind being a reviewer and review some CDs too. His magazine catered to the hard rock fans out there, even though he did cover some pop stuff, but not very often. Again, with through the invent of the internet and the advances in modern technology, he became part of the show via peer-to-peer connection. He's in Cleveland, I'm in the Chicago area, and we do the show together every Saturday.
Dude, that's amazing. I got to say, when I was first hearing the show, it sounds like you two are both in the same room together.
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
It's amazing that you could do it. Well, he's in Cleveland, you're in Chicago.
Right.
And
but yeah,
great,
if you weren't,
I can never figure that out. How comfortable they are with each.
If you weren't aware of it, you would think that he and I are both in the same studio every Saturday night when we do the show live.
Very cool, very cool. So did Classic Metal Show start as an internet show, or was it actually on a terrestrial radio?
It was on terrestrial radio for the first 7 years. I did the show at a radio station in the Akron, Ohio, Cleveland area for the first 7 years, and due to job change, I moved to the Chicago area. And I basically shopped the Classic Metal Show around to some various stations in the area, and nobody was interested in it because they were all corporate owned. Clear Channel has an iron grip on the programming of their radio stations, so they weren't about to allow a specialty show to be added into their format. And Chris and I, Chris has been into the internet for a lot of years, and through his technical expertise and my expertise in the hardware portion of it, he and I basically learned how to broadcast over the internet starting back in 2003. We started doing the Classic Metal Show exclusively internet, and it is what it is today. I think we have, again, not trying to pat myself on the back, but I think we have one of the best sounding shows out there.
Well, I mean, it is. I mean, being, a big fan and listening to radio throughout the years, I mean, it's people like you that kept this music alive. Because I do remember back in the day when I would listen from the late 70s, early 80s, you had King Biscuit Flower Hour, you had the High Voltage, you had Metal Shop, you had all these great shows that were syndicated that, no matter where you are, you could hear great metal, even though the station wasn't playing, metal throughout the day. You could always hear really cool shows, and since Clear Channel came in, like you said, in the 90s, all that just got wiped out, and it's great that you're able to do that on the internet and do an uncensored show, which I think is great, where the FCC doesn't control, which again, I think is great. The cool thing about the Classic Metal Show is you add that kind of that Howard Stern quality to it, to the talk show. You add a lot of the humor with metal, so it keeps the show exciting and entertaining, whether or not you're really particularly a hard rock rock or metal fan, you'd still be very entertained by listening to the Classic Metal Show. So if you haven't heard the Classic Metal Show, tune in to classicmetalshow.com. So that's my hype for the Classic Metal Show today, guys.
All right. Well, thanks, Bob. I appreciate that plug. And the thing is, we have our core fan base that enjoy what Chris and I do. Obviously, early on in the early stages of the Classic Metal Show, it was more of a music-oriented show, and when Chris was on board, it jumped more into a 50-50 mix of talk and music, and now it's more of a 70-30 mix of talk and music because there's so many topics out there to comment on, which I think Chris and I, when it comes to commentary, I don't think there's anybody out there who can beat us as far as, humorous commentary on.
Well, the Rev comes close. You gotta admit.
And the thing is that people forget that metal music represented rebellion. And
exactly.
for anybody who complains about what we do, saying we're too vulgar or we're too controversial or we're not nice people because we're not nice to everyone because there's some buffoons out there that need a good hammer to the side of the head, And they forget that the whole metal genre was supposed to be rock and roll and rebellion, and I don't know of any more of a rebellious show than the Classic Metal Show.
Well, being a fan, and I will say that too, and that's what I like about having, both you guys on the show. I mean, Nadir, you've kept that rock and roll spirit alive through playing. I mean, whether or not you're into the whole Hollywood rock scene, I mean, you got to admire the fact that, Nadir, you've been doing this since the early 80s, and you haven't changed. You haven't went with the trends. You haven't went with the changes, and you've kept that, rebellious rock and roll attitude till this day, and same goes for you, Neeley, with the show. And that's what it's all about. Everyone thinks, it's, just keeping metal alive and, keeping it safe and whatever, and for the masses, fuck that. Metal wasn't meant to be like that, and that's why, if it wasn't for the internet, you're absolutely right. I think the spirit of hard rock and heavy metal music would be dead because it would be so controlled. It would be like, watching some fucking TV show or something.
The control that media has over everything, and again, like you said, if it wasn't for the internet, you wouldn't have, people from other countries, expressing themselves or going to your site, and hitting your music and enjoying it and asking you, personal questions about certain songs and why you did this and why you did that. I mean, I think it's a beautiful thing. I just hope that it doesn't get to a point where the government just wants to put the iron fist down and tries to censor it.
Well, stupid-ass knuckleheads keep complaining about it, right, Neeley?
Right. Well, like I said, there are people who complain and say you guys aren't very nice or you're mean. You guys are just mean. No, we're just honest and straightforward and a little bit of rebellion, and it goes along with the whole, like I said, the whole vibe of
Chris is mean. I mean, Chris is a prick. You got to admit. I mean, what he did to poor old Jeffrey C. Music. I mean, come on.
Well, that is true, but that's why the Classic Metal.
That's why we love him, though.
That's why the Classic Metal Show works so well, is because I'm the even-keeled, level-headed one, and Chris is just the wild, crazy guy. You just never know what he's going to do or say.
Well, you are the self-proclaimed Forrest Gump of metal, isn't that correct? Oh, no, that's the other guy. I'm sorry. It's the...
No, the other guy that reads Blue Boy magazine.
So Nadir, according to the Classic Metal Show, at least the blogger there, Nikki Sixx is the asshole devil. Can you confirm that?
To tell you the truth, I can't really say that is something that I can confirm, because last time I saw Nikki Sixx, we were having a really good time. So I'm going to leave that sad, because last time
that's our previous Classic Metal Show episode, a great episode. Where'd you find that guy?
I didn't find him. I didn't find him. He just called in. It was just a random caller.
Oh, wow. Really? That was hilarious.
Classic Metal Show definitely gets some really crazy people in there, huh? Pretty funny.
Yeah, we're talking to one of them right now.
No, God, no. I've listened to the show, and there's some really crazy-ass people.
So once again, Neeley, plug the show again and the times it's on, Saturday nights.
Yeah, you can go to theclassicmetalshow.com. We're on Saturday nights live, not to rip off the NBC long-running show, but it's live on Saturdays from 9 p.m. to 3 a.m. Eastern Time. And you can tune in at cmsradio.net.
All right. Well, Nadir, how could fans get a hold of you?
Okay, well, you can get a hold of me at www.depriest.com. That's DPRIEST.com. Anyone sends us any messages, I make sure we get back to people. So we answer all messages.
Well, very cool, guys. I guess that's it. Was there anything else you wanted to throw in?
Well, Bob, Chris and I appreciate what you do with the Skull Sessions, and again, I'm honored to be a part of this session, and we're gonna work and make Skull Sessions the number one podcast above the Talking Dumbbells over there at iTunes.
Well, all right, man. Well, I appreciate it. It's always an honor having you, Neeley, and you as well, Nadir. Great having you guys.
Thank you so much, Bob.
All right, well, there you go. That was Wendell Neeley from the Classic Metal Show and Nadir DePriest from London and DePriest. Thank you very much to both Nadir and Neeley for that great discussion. You can check out the Classic Metal Show once again on theclassicmetalshow.com. You can hear them live every Saturday night, I believe, from 9 p.m. till 3 a.m. Eastern Time. You can check out their schedule on theclassicmetalshow.com or cmsradio.net. They also do feature the Shockwave Skull Sessions, so if you missed the podcast, you could always hear it on the Classic Metal Show. Once again, you can check their site for the scheduled times. Also, I want to give congratulations to the Classic Metal Show for their 13th anniversary. They've been around 13 years. They had a big anniversary party a couple weeks ago, by the way, in the Cleveland area, and in fact, Nadir performed at that performance. Of course, we did the podcast prior to that, but by the time it's posted, that actually passed. I believe that was January 17th, and I heard that went over great. And don't forget to check out Nadir's reunion with London. He had mentioned they're doing their first reunion show back in L.A. at the Paladinos Club on the 14th of February, Saturday night. So if you're in that area, check that out. And thanks again for listening and for your support. Be sure to spread the word. Once again, you can email me at shockwaveskullsessions@gmail.com. And to catch up on any previous episodes, you could, of course, go to iTunes, or you could go to the official Shockwave Skull Sessions site at roadrunnerrecords.com/Skull Sessions. And you can also check out our sister podcast, the Shockwaves Hard Radio podcast. That, of course, is on hardradio.com. Also available on iTunes. You can just type in Shockwaves in the search of the iTunes store, and both the Shockwave Skull Sessions and Shockwaves Hard Radio podcast will pop up. Be sure to subscribe to both, and be sure to send in those comments. Once again, don't forget to check out the Classic Metal Show at theclassicmetalshow.com. And remember, if you build it, they will rock.